You seem a bit neutral towards Jews in Palestine. I got a bit confused with some of the things you were
Oh,
saying.
no, I'm not neutral at all. I'm a total Zionist and pro-Israel. And I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. That was entirely inadvertent. Because see, look, you cannot I have spent 30 some years now trying to raise awareness about Islamic jihad and how it threatens all free people. And you cannot be opposed to jihad without supporting Israel, because Israel is on the front lines of the global jihad. And the same ideology that hit us on 9/11 and that we face with the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel faces every day. And so those people who are saying, and I know there are a lot of them, maybe it's some of you today, I hope not, but those people who are saying that, I'm America first, and that means I'm against an alliance with Israel, that's completely wrongheaded. You ally with people who have the same interests. America first does not mean and should not mean America alone, and we should cultivate alliances with people who are faced by the same kind of threat, and then we're stronger against that threat. And also, of course, Israel is the only free society in the Middle East and so on. There's a number of reasons why the alliance should be maintained. But in any case, I'm for it. Now, you may have heard that while all this is going on, we have achieved peace with Iran, and there's a great deal of back and forth about that, a great deal of controversy. The situation is quite unclear, but there are some things that we can be sure of right now. And one of them is that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not actually going to stop fighting. I'm sorry to have to say that to you, but it is the reality, because this is not a war in the way that people in the United States and Europe generally understand war. At the end of World War I, there was the Treaty of Versailles that was signed by all the parties, victorious and defeated, and there was peace. At the end of World War II, the Germans and the Japanese also signed instruments of surrender, and it was all over. Now, this is not like either of those occasions, because as far as the Islamic Republic of Iran is concerned, this is not a war, it's a jihad. Now, what is the difference? Jihad in Arabic means struggle. And there are all kinds of struggles. Just like in English, there can be the struggle to lose weight or quit smoking or something like that. And also the great struggle between civilizations, such as we saw in the Cold War between free societies and communist societies. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran is pursuing a jihad. And the primary meaning of jihad, as far as it's concerned, and as far as classic Islamic theology is concerned, is warfare against unbelievers in order to establish the rule of Islamic law. And that warfare is demanded and commanded by Allah, the supreme being, in the holy book, the Quran, that Islam reveres, and consequently, it can never be negotiated away. If you are a Christian, you know what I'm talking about, or Jewish, or really any other religion, but Jews and Christians will know the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments cannot be negotiated away. You're not going to sit down at a negotiating table with somebody and say, yeah, I really don't like that bit about stealing. Let's throw that out, or I'll trade you that for something else. It's not negotiable. It's the word of God. It's the same thing in the Islamic understanding of jihad. It's not negotiable. You don't agree not to pursue it. You might agree to pause for a while, but then in Islamic law, there is a rule that if a Muslim army is fighting a non-Muslim army, there's only one reason why you would ever stop and make an agreement, and that is if you're losing. And if you're losing and you need time to gather strength so that you can fight again more effectively, then you sign an agreement with the infidel party. Otherwise, there's no justification for ever doing that. Now, is the Islamic Republic working according to that assumption? There's no reason to think that it isn't. It is, after all, an Islamic Republic. What is an Islamic Republic but a republic that is oriented toward Islam? And Islam, it must be understood, is not a religion also. Just as jihad is not a war in the Western sense, so Islam is not a religion in the Western sense. It is a religion in that it claims to relate human beings to God. And that's what all religions claim to do. That's the meaning of the word itself. But it's also a political system. And it's a political system that is supremacist, exclusionary, expansionist, and violent. supremacist, exclusionary, expansionist, and violent. It has to be supreme. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, said Islam must dominate and not be dominated. And there is no possibility envisioned in Islamic law where believers in Islam and people who don't believe in Islam have equal rights in a society. Islam must dominate and not be dominated means that the Muslims have special rights that the non-Muslims do not have. And this is the only just and perfect society as far as Islamic law is concerned. And Muslims have the responsibility to wage war in order to establish that society. This does not mean that every Muslim is doing that any more than every Christian is loving his enemies and turning the other cheek. But Jesus did say, love your enemies and turn the other cheek. And if you're a Christian who's mean and vengeful, it still says that. And if you are a Muslim who is not waging war against unbelievers, nonetheless, the command is still there in the Quran, and it's still being pursued by entities such as the Islamic Republic of Iran. So why did they agree to this with Trump? Precisely in order to gather strength to fight again more effectively. We also have to understand that this is the reason why there's a conflict at all. Nobody ever steps back and asks, well, why are we fighting the Islamic Republic of Iran? Iran is way over there. They really have nothing necessarily to do with the United States at all. What is the deal that Iran, of all places, would be so antagonistic that there has to be this conflict to start with? It's funny how very seldom you hear that question even considered. And I'll tell you why there is the conflict between America and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Before the Islamic Republic was established, which was in 1979, Iran was an ally of the United States and very Western-oriented. And when the Islamic Republic was established and the Shah, or the king of Iran, was overthrown in 1979, Iran immediately became antagonistic toward the United States, stormed the U.S. embassy, took hostages, held them for a year and a half, and has been on a war footing and been an avowed enemy of the United States ever since. As a matter of fact, you know how if you are a Christian, you go to church on Sunday, or at least theoretically go to church on Sunday. Muslims go to mosque on Friday at noon and hear a sermon. And so Friday is the big day for mosque congregational prayer. And in the Islamic Republic of Iran, the government has ordered the people at Friday prayers every week to chant death to America. So you can just stop and think about that. If you go to church or go to synagogue or whatever, imagine if they stood up at the end of the service every week and started chanting death to Iran or death to anybody. It's inconceivable. But this is what is actually commanded in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, why? What's the big deal? Why would they hate us this way? The Ayatollah Khomeini, who founded the Islamic Republic of Iran, said that this revolution was not for Iran alone. It was to be exported. It was not a revolution that only made Iran an Islamic Republic, but what he was envisioning was that the whole world would come under the rule of Islamic law. Now, if you have a global vision like that, and you think that eventually the whole world is going to be under this particular kind of government, then who's your chief competitor? The United States, because the United States is the foremost representative government in the world. And so you have government that derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. Have you ever heard that phrase? It is a foremost foundation of the American Republic, that our government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. That's why we vote. That's why representatives of the American people can be voted out and replaced, because they no longer have the consent of the governed. But in the Islamic scheme of things, the consent of the governed doesn't matter at all. And the government does not derive its just powers from the consent of the governed. It derives its just powers from the law of Allah. And the law of Allah is implemented by the government, whether people like it or not, and that's it. So if you think that you are bringing the law of God to the whole world, and that you have to do that and wage war against other countries in order to bring the law of God and impose it upon them, then your chief competitor is the country that says governments should derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. So they hate America and they shout death to America. Not the Iranian people, but the leadership. The Iranian people, there are many, many people who remember what it was like before 1979, and they don't like the new regime. But also, Iran is kind of the poster child for what happens if you have gun control laws. The government has all the guns, the people have none. So even though the whole nation sometimes has risen up and millions of people have been out on the streets protesting the government, they just shoot down a few tens of thousands of them. They murdered 40,000 in the streets earlier this year. They don't care. They don't derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. They're ruling by the law of Allah. And Allah says, strike terror in the enemies of Allah. So if they're implementing his law, they figure the people who are protesting are the enemies of Allah. They strike terror in them by killing a number of them with impunity. And that's just the way they operate. They also chant death to Israel because Israel is on land that they think belongs to Islam because it was once ruled under the law of Islam, and any land that belongs to Islam at any point belongs to the Muslims forever, and they have another passage in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 191, which says, drive them out from where they drove you out. Very simple. Drive them out from where they drove you out. So see, if you think that, that's the law of God, that's the revelation from the divine, the only supreme being. And he's saying, you used to have that land and you don't have it now, then drive them out. Then that's a commandment no less important than the 10 Commandments for Christians. And so you will fight and believe that you're fighting a religious war. And so they don't have any shared border with Israel. They don't have competing interests economically, militarily, anywhere, any other way. They only hate Israel because it's on what they consider to be Islamic land, and they hate America for interfering with their project to export the global Islamic revolution, or export the Islamic revolution globally. So we come to this agreement. It should have been a sign that they were admitting they were losing. See, this is a big problem that we have in the United States today, and that is that there is nobody in the government who is paying any attention to what I am telling you today about jihad. If you look at the statements of the Iranian government going back to 1979, every last one of them you could read, and every last one of them that explains why they hate America will tell you it's all about Islam. They're the first ones to say it. I'm just telling you what they say. If you read every statement about Iran from the U.S. State Department from 1979 on, whether a Republican or a Democrat is president, none of them mention Islam. So we have a big knowledge gap here. The one side is telling us this is what the conflict is all about. And we're saying, well, there's one thing we know the conflict is not about, and that's what they say it's all about. It doesn't work that way. They told us what the conflict was all about. We ought to have been studying it and trying to understand what to do about it. And if we had done that in the State Department over all these years, then there never would have been any kind of negotiated settlement with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And then you might say, well, then how can there ever be peace? There is one way, and that is you do not wage jihad. And here again, it's according to Islamic law, which the Islamic Republic follows. You do not wage jihad if the enemy has more than twice your strength and you have no chance of winning. If they didn't think they could win, they wouldn't be fighting. And if we had projected strength, not only military, but civilizational, societal, cultural strength, then none of this would be happening now at all. And if we had read the laws of Islam and understood that when they say, hey, yeah, we do want to have negotiations, let's go to Pakistan or Qatar or wherever we're going to have the negotiations and talk it all over, that was an admission that they were losing, then none of this would be happening today. This is a problem that could be managed, but it can only be managed in an intelligent manner by being informed of all the aspects of it that are involved. And this is the big problem that we have, that not all of those aspects have been considered. And this is why there is so much confusion over the last few days, where the president says there's a ceasefire and everybody is going to stop fighting. And then Hezbollah, the terrorist group in Lebanon, launches rockets into Israel in violation of the very first stipulation of the Memorandum of Understanding, that is the agreement that was just signed at Versailles, that there would be a cessation of hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon. Now, Why did they do that? Because the Israeli government already said, well, we're going to defend ourselves. We're going to defend our people. They're targeting Israeli civilians when they shoot these rockets. So we're going to respond. When the Israelis responded, the Islamic Republic said, this is a violation of the ceasefire. And so we are closing the Strait of Hormuz again. And that's where we are right now. And the whole idea really is to get the United States government to pressure the Israeli government not to respond to rocket fire from Lebanon so that the strait can remain open and peace will supposedly prevail, except for peace for the Israeli civilians. The thing is, no country can agree to that because then, I mean, what if people are firing rockets from Mexico and somebody says, well, don't respond because we got heavy talks with Mexico going on and we want to make peace. Well, that's all very well, but if civilians are being killed in any country, this is not really a good, strong basis to establish a peace agreement upon. The thing about the jihad also is that it's global. On September 11th, 2001, 19 Islamic jihadis took down the Twin Towers, attacked the Pentagon. They were planning to attack another site in Washington, D.C., either the White House or the U.S. Capitol building, and were stopped when the passengers rose up and took the plane down itself in a field in Pennsylvania. And those people who carried out those attacks on 9/11 held to exactly the same ideology that the Islamic Republic of Iran holds to today, and exactly the same ideology of the people who are killing Christians in Nigeria today, and the people who are killing Hindus in Bangladesh today, and other jihads all around the world. It all emanates from the same ideology and the same global imperative. And so if we wanted to deal with this problem in a comprehensive and effective manner, then one of the main things that we could do would be to establish or strengthen our alliances with every country that is threatened by the same jihad. And so that would include India, it would include Thailand, it would include Nigeria, at least in the sense of Biafra, the Christians of southeastern Nigeria who are fighting for their independence precisely in order to protect themselves from the Islamic jihad. And it would include Israel and others as well. And this would be an alliance based on the fact that we're all facing the same threat, and that the only way to deal with this threat, as I explained, is by means of a strength that is so great that the other side sees that there is no good in fighting. And you might think, well, really, is that even possible? Is that likely that there could be such a strength on the part of the United States and its allies that the jihad would actually stop? And I say, yeah, actually there is, because that's happened in history. And even if you go back 100 years ago or a little more now, you do not find the same kind of jihad activity in the West or anywhere in the world that you find today. As a matter of fact, the last great jihad that was declared by a caliph, the caliph means successor. And according to Islamic law, here again, the caliph is the successor of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, as the military and political leader of the Muslims and the spiritual leader of the Muslims worldwide. And a lot of the great Islamic empires of the past were caliphates. The caliphate was abolished, however, in 1924, and there hasn't been another since then, although a lot of Islamic groups are trying to reestablish it now. But anyway, the abolition of the caliphate is actually my point. The Ottoman Empire was the last great caliphate. An Islamic empire ruled by Islamic law and waging jihad against non-Muslim states. And if you've studied any history, you know that they were menacing Europe for many centuries and trying to conquer and Islamize Europe. And they declared World War I to be a jihad. They were fighting on the side of the Germans. And they lost World War I. And the Ottoman Empire itself fell. And then the secular Republic of Turkey was founded. It's not so secular anymore, but it was for many decades. And it was founded by a man named Kemal Ataturk, who founded it on the basis of the idea that political Islam had failed. The Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire and it lost the war. And he said, look, the West is successful. Western secular republics are the ones that are the most powerful, most prosperous countries in the world. And so we should imitate them. And he founded the Republic of Turkey. Republic of Turkey was never a great respecter of human rights, carried out the Armenian and Greek and Assyrian genocides and so on. It did, however, indicate by its very secular nature that it's still officially a secular republic, although now Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is rolling all that back and re-Islamizing the country. Turkey showed that there was a possibility in the Islamic world for a Muslim ruler of a Muslim majority country to say, this isn't working, and the West is much more successful. We should imitate them. We could get back to that point. Nowadays, it seems inconceivable. A lot has changed in the world. You look out in Islamic countries today, and most every woman is wearing the hijab, the headscarf. You see that in America a lot too. And the hijab, I'm not sure you're aware, it's because it's the woman's responsibility to make sure that men are not tempted. And so if men are tempted, the women have to cover themselves to make sure they're not tempted. And then if men end up being tempted anyway, then the woman is liable to be killed in what is known as an honor killing. These things are part of Islamic culture, but you went back 50 or 60 years, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt in the 1950s, you can see him on YouTube. There's still the video out there. He says the Muslim Brotherhood, which was and is still an Islamic organization trying to establish Islamic law all around the world, he says they want to force women to wear the hijab. And he starts laughing, and the audience starts laughing, and he says, you tell them to wear it. Well, you go to Egypt now, and every woman is wearing it. And this is in part a response to simply going as far as you were able to go before you're stopped, which is what aggressors do in pretty much every context. And, if you are in school and you have a bully in school, he's going to keep on doing as much as he can get away with until he's stopped. And it's the same thing with the jihadis. They'll go as far as they can until they're stopped. In the 20th century, at least in the early part of it, they were stopped. But now it's just the opposite. They're emboldened. And every gesture of conciliation, every attempt at outreach toward them is considered by them to be a sign of weakness, and they take advantage of it. This is the great danger that we have today, that our attempts to reach out in friendship to the Islamic Republic of Iran are going to be seen only as a sign of weakness, and they'll step up the jihad instead of thinking, well, now is not the time, we have to set it aside. And so, whatever happens now, the situation is very confused, very much in flux. But one thing we can be sure of, and that is that the Islamic Republic of Iran will continue to chant death to America and death to Israel, and will continue to pursue both of them. The Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed a few months ago, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, he said a few years back that death to America is not just a slogan, it's the policy and goal of the entire regime. And that policy and goal has not changed. So I hope that as you go on to college, go on into your careers, and perhaps some of you enter into the political sphere, that you will deal more realistically with the problem of jihad as manifested by the Islamic Republic of Iran and also by many others, much more realistically than it has been by the U.S. government up to now. Thank you very much.
My question for you is, do you believe we can live alongside peacefully with Islamic-dominated societies? And if not, what do you believe we can do to circumvent this and find peace and be safe?
We cannot live alongside Islamic-dominated societies in peace. This is not because we should be belligerent toward them, but because they will be belligerent toward us. The Quran says, chapter 8, verse 39, fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. When you go to college and they start lying to you on a major basis, they're going to tell you Islam is peace and Islam at best allows for self-defense. But that verse in itself, chapter 8, verse 39, write it down if you're taking notes. It explodes all that in itself. See, fight them, that's the unbelievers, that's us, until persecution is no more. That's self-defense. But if it were only self-defense, it would stop there. But it doesn't stop there. Fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. If you're going to fight until religion is all for Allah, then see, you might be minding your own business and not bothering anybody, but if your religion is not all for Allah, some Muslim might one day think he's got to fight you. This is the way Islam is. And there is, if you have a whole country that is oriented toward Islam, like Iran or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan, many others as well, then they are they're in a perpetual situation of hostility toward the United States because the United States is not Islamic and they have an imperialist imperative, as I just explained. And also because, as I explained in the main talk, they see us as their chief competitor to establishing Islamic law everywhere. So what do? Same as I said, we have to be strong and understand that there can never be peace. See, the president, he's the great deal maker, right? He wrote The Art of the Deal, very successful businessman, billionaire. And so he thinks he can make a deal with anybody. And maybe he can. He's extraordinarily clever. At the same time, though, it's very difficult to make a deal with fanatical ideologues who believe that they have a responsibility before their God to be hostile to you and ultimately to subjugate you under their hegemony. Make a deal with that. So we just have to understand that and maintain a position of societal strength.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've slowly seen over the past decade the rise in Islam taking over Europe. We've also been seeing it since October 7th primarily happen in America with the pro-Hamas protests and so forth. I've also noticed it in my American school, all the way in Taiwan, where I gave a speech about October 7th right afterwards, and I got a lot of backlash for it. So I was wondering, how do you think we can prevent the same thing that's happening in Europe from occurring in America?
Well, we first have to stop. Thank you. That's a very important question. And we first have to stop the immigration from Muslim countries. And people say, oh, no, that's terrible. That's discrimination. Well, look, you got a choice. We have a tolerant society. Islam is a radically intolerant ideology. Can a tolerant society tolerate a radically intolerant ideology? It's also a supremacist ideology. So if you have a tolerant society, says everybody's welcome, come on in, and then you let in all these people, among whom are many, I don't say that every last one of them is, but among whom are many who are supremacist and intolerant, and so they start to behave that way, your tolerant society is going to be overcome and destroyed, and you're not going to be able to keep it. So you have to make the decision. Do we inconvenience some people by not allowing in the whole group? Or do we inconvenience ourselves and endanger our future and our children's future by allowing in everybody? And this is the question before us today. There's no natural right anybody has to come live in the United States of America. Look, I'll tell you something. I have a friend who I knew in New York City many years ago, and he married a Peruvian lady, and he moved to Peru. And he was lobbying hard about 10 years ago to get me to move to Peru. And he was telling me how great it was. And one of the things he told me, though, it turned me off the whole thing completely. He said he's got his Peruvian wife and he's got 2 kids who were born in Peru. And so they speak Spanish like natives. They grew up in Peru. They're completely Peruvian, but they're not Peruvian citizens because he's an American. And it's not that easy. You can't just be born in Peru of a Peruvian mother and you're Peruvian, because they're very careful to maintain Peru's cultural identity, and so they have severe restrictions on immigration and citizenship. Now, would you say, gee, the Peruvians, they sound pretty racist? Nobody says that. They're just trying to take care of their country and their future. Why can't we do that? So
why do you think there is a disconnect in the minds of these college students where they say they support women and they support peace, when in reality Islam is so violent and it oppresses women?
yeah, you know why? Because they're taught by Marxists. That's the problem. That you go to college today or university pretty much anywhere, and your professors are Marxists. And they're going to tell you about the world in terms of Marxist dialectic. That means, very simply, Marxists view the world in terms of the oppressor and the oppressed, and they're on the side of the oppressed. And so they view the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the powerful Israeli oppressor versus the poor, deprived, oppressed Palestinians. It's a lot of nonsense from the very beginning. Did you know that the Palestinians didn't even exist until 1964? If you go back to 1948, to when Israel was founded, and you read the United Nations deliberations about the founding of Israel and about how they were going to partition the land and give part of it to the Arabs, never once do they mention Palestinians. They talk about Palestine because that was the name of the region, but it's like Cleveland. You know, it's a city, it's got city boundaries, but there's no Cleveland ethnicity or nationality. They're just Americans. And the Palestinians were and are Arabs who were not distinguishable linguistically, culturally, religiously, or ethnically from the other Arabs. So, in 1964, the KGB, the Communist Party's spy service like the CIA, established the Palestinian nationality. They made it up out of nothing. Why? So that they could frame the conflict with Israel in Marxist terms as oppressor versus oppressed, the Israelis versus the massive Israeli war machine versus this tiny Palestinian people. It's all nonsense, but that's what you learn when you go to college, along with a lot of other nonsense. So all these children who are out there protesting, they don't have a clue about what they're dealing with. And you're right, there's a tremendous contradiction between Marxism that is atheistic and is supposedly radically egalitarian, women and men totally equal, everybody else totally equal. I don't mean everybody else like all the made up genders. I mean all the nationalities totally equal, and it's all seen as as social justice. So how could they ally with Islam that institutionalizes discrimination against women, discrimination against non-Muslims, and is obviously very theistic? It's an alliance of convenience that's based on a shared hatred of the West and a shared authoritarianism. They both hate dissent. They both hate free speech. They both hate the West. They hate the United States. And so they figure that they will destroy us, the patriots, and then they'll turn against each other. And the leftists think they'll be able to control the Muslims. I don't think they will. The Ayatollah Khomeini, who established the Islamic Republic of Iran, as I said, he allied with the Iranian communists. And the Iranian communists thought, oh, great, we're going to be part of this new government and we'll wield power. And instead, once he took power, he threw them in prison and had them killed. And that's likely to be the same fate that these leftist college students will face should they win. But we hope that they'll never find out because they won't win.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You touched on this a little bit in your speech, but there are many fashion companies like Lululemon that I've noticed that are starting to mass produce hijabs. And there are many Americans and somehow feminists that are praising it and telling Christians that we need to accept it into our society. How would I explain to them that's actually a sign of oppression?
Well, it is certainly a sign of oppression. I mentioned in the talk the hijab is designed to keep men from being tempted, and then women are brutalized and killed if the men are tempted anyway. Also, women have been brutalized and killed for not wearing the hijab. And then crazy Western feminists established World Hijab Day in solidarity with the supposed women who wear hijab who are supposedly oppressed by evil right-wingers. No evil right-wingers are oppressing women wearing hijab. It's just the opposite. They're oppressed by their own families and their own cultures that will kill them or beat them up if they don't wear it. But I think Lululemon and those people, they know all that. They just don't care. And they see that this is the way the cultural winds are blowing, and they want to make a buck. What we have here, actually, interestingly enough, is a kind of fascism. You know, the left always says, oh, the right wing is fascist and Trump is fascist and so on. They're actually the fascists. What's the difference between fascism and communism? In communism, the government takes control of the businesses. They own everything. Everywhere you work, if you work for a restaurant or a clothing store or whatever, you work for the government. Fascist governments, they don't do that. They just make all the privately owned businesses work for them. So they all do the same things and hop to the same orders, but they're still privately owned. That's what we have in America today, when a lot of the businesses jump to be in lockstep with the left. And when the left was in power during the Obama and Biden years, then they would work with the government. That's fascism. And so we need to call that out, and maybe that will embarrass them into stopping. But I don't think they'll stop because you reveal that they are aiding oppression. They know that and don't care.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Davin Nystrom. I just graduated from Classical Conversations. I wanted to ask, obviously it is a major goal and ideal of Islam to be taken over, but what is some nonviolent and what are some strategies of Islam to look out for and combat?
Well, there's certainly nonviolent jihad. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book years ago called Stealth Jihad that was all about infiltration and subversion that the Islamic groups are carrying out today. There's a group called the Muslim Brotherhood that I mentioned that is an international organization, but it's very active in the United States. Every major Muslim organization in the United States is tied to the Brotherhood. And the Brotherhood few years back, there was an Islamic charity called the Holy Land Foundation, and they were taking charitable contributions and then sending the money to Hamas, which is a terrorist group according to the U.S. State Department. So the U.S. State Department closed down the Holy Land Foundation because it's illegal to send money to terrorist groups. And the FBI raided their offices. When they raided their offices, they found a very interesting document, and they called an explanatory memorandum on the Brotherhood in the United States, and it was all about how the Muslim Brotherhood is going to take over the United States. And it said, you can find it online and read it. I highly recommend it. It's very important reading. And it said, I'll give you the exact quote, "The brothers must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it falls and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions." That's the plan for the U.S. Now, notice that it said by their hands and the hands of the believers. What does that mean? It means that they're going to eliminate and destroy Western civilization from within and sabotage its miserable house by the hands of the people of the West themselves. And that's actually a reference to chapter 59, verse 2 of the Quran, where Allah is fighting against the unbelievers, and he makes them confused so that they start destroying their own houses by their hands. And that's what the Muslim Brotherhood has been working to do in the United States. The Council on American Islamic Relations, the Muslim American Society, the Muslim Students Association, the Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, all these groups and more. They're working to get us to destroy ourselves, destroy our house by our own hands. The college students going out to agitate for Hamas, that's an example of that. The politicians who think, oh, I need Muslim votes, I'll go and appear and speak for CARE and say, we got to fight Islamophobia. That's an example of that. Because then they think that any kind of work against the advancing jihad, it's Islamophobic, it's racist, it's bigoted. And so they don't do it. And so they're making us destroy our own home by our own hands. And it's actually working great because there is still so little awareness of that it's even happening. And so you will find friends and allies of the Muslim Brotherhood at all levels of government, and they're getting elected to more and more positions at all levels of government. There's a group called Engage. It's another Muslim Brotherhood organization working to elect Muslims everywhere. And Joe Biden spoke to them by video and pledged to help them because he thinks he's getting Muslims to vote for him and it's all one big happy family. And he doesn't realize that he's helping to destroy our own house by our own hands. And that's generally how it's working. It's working great so far. I hope you will grow up and combat it.
Thank you so much.
So I wasn't alive at the time, but after the radical attacks on 9/11, there seems to have been a surge in national unity. People were able to put aside their differences in skin color and religious orientation. What can we do now to transcend these differences again and rally to support our country during this time of war in the Middle East, especially with the governor of New York being a Muslim?
The mayor's a Muslim. I remember those days, and it lasted for about a week or so, maybe two. It was very nice when it happened. Suddenly we were all Americans. You saw flags everywhere. Everybody wanted to go and avenge the taking down of the towers, but it evaporated almost immediately. And one of the reasons why it evaporated was because of the misinformation and disinformation that we have been all subjected to and still are. And one of the problems is, like I said, the professors in the colleges and universities, they're Marxists. They teach hatred of America. They teach these young students. You'll see when you go to college, you probably have already seen it in high school, that a lot of the people that you're in school with, they think that it's cool to hate America and to wish ill of it. And they have no idea what they're wishing for. And they better hope they don't get it. But with that said, the only solution is to reform the colleges and universities. And I think that one of the main things we need to do is say you're not going to get a penny of any kind of government support. A lot of these colleges, they have huge endowments and they still get government money if you are not allowing for all points of view to be heard, or if you are teaching anti-Americanism and so on. And this needs to be understood as a battle for our future, that if we don't win, we're really done for. And so I encourage you to fight that and stand for the fact that we have everything to be proud of and grateful for as Americans, and that we should all be thanking God every day that we live here and that we are able to enjoy the freedoms and the prosperity that our forefathers have allowed for us to enjoy, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of in being an American. And this needs to be said and resaid and repeated proudly and without apology in every context.
Hi, my name is Josiah Peters, and I go to Harmony High School in Florida. How can we protect America from Islamic law on the home front when we allow them to practice their religion because we give them the religious freedoms to do so in America?
Well, see, this is the thing. There's a lot of confusion about this. The freedom of religion is not some kind of license to break every other law. And yet that is how it's being understood. In the 19th century, the Mormon church was dominant in Utah, as I believe it still is. And Utah was a territory, not a state. And they applied for statehood. And the United States Supreme Court said, nope, Utah is not going to become a state until the Mormon church outlaws polygamy. Nowadays, that would never happen. The Mormon church outlawed polygamy and Utah became a state. But nowadays people would say, oh, that's their religious freedom. How can you say that? Because there is a phenomenon called, this is terrible, I'm sorry to have to mention it, but it's a fact, female genital mutilation, which is practiced in Islam. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, said it should be done on both men and women. And it is a thing that causes a tremendous amount of pain and horror for young girls and women. And it's widely practiced in some areas of the Islamic world. There were a couple of doctors in Detroit who were arrested a few years ago for doing this, and they made religious freedom their defense. They said, this is part of Islam, and that's why we're doing it, and so a judge threw the case out. If we continue to have that idea of religious freedom, then what are we going to do? Say, well, these guys came in with bombs and they were going to blow themselves up and kill everybody in the room, but it's their religion. Because the Quran says kill them wherever you find them. And so we have to let them do it because it's their religious freedom. That would be absurd. And so why are we letting these other things happen? We need to delineate and make it very clear that religious freedom is absolutely a right that Americans enjoy, but that it is not something that allows you to break other laws. And it ends there. And so if you are going to say that the terrorism or female genital mutilation or any of these other things that are contrary to constitutional freedoms are part of your religion, then you got to leave those aspects of your religion at the door and make it very clear in your mosques that those things are not tolerated in the United States, that you teach against them in the United States, or you're not welcome to be here. But nobody has the courage to do that so far. I hope some of you will.
Thank you.